Good evening and welcome to the latest music podcast series from the Over Our Garden Wall, guys. This is a series where we're setting out to try and establish, if we can, what the 30 greatest songs by Scottish artists are. And to do that, we are using some voting techniques on Twitter X, and we will be running regular podcasts to review what the guys are saying and obviously any opinions that we have as we're doing that. To help us do that, as we always do, we'll bring some of our friends in to help us with the conversation. So tonight we have Caroline Binning with us. Caroline, good evening.
Good evening, Brian.
How are we?
We're very well, thank you. Looking forward to it.
Are we ready to do this again after the 100 greatest albums?
We're more than ready.
It's not going to last 18 months, right? I can promise you that. Alison's just had a heart attack. And for the first time, and we're absolutely delighted to welcome on Alistair Braidwood, who a lot of you guys will know from the Scots Way sort of cultural podcast show, radio show, Facebook, etc. Alistair, good evening.
Hello, Brian. Oh, Caroline. Lovely to join you.
Alistair, you're just raised the bar for us already, mate. Just by having you on. I mean, we went from having George Patterson on to yourself, so it's
no.
It's all upside, isn't it? Yeah.
Let's not start that.
George will kill us for that.
We will.
Okay, so I know you guys are aware a bit about what we're trying to do, but I guess just for the guys that are going to tune in, just a quick summary. So we're looking to try and get at the end of our conversation a list of 30 of the songs that we think are the best ones that have ever been released by Scottish artists, and I'll come on to Scottish artists in a second. And I guess when we had the idea, we did ask for some sort of feedback on Twitter X, and we got something like 5,000 song nominations from the guys on there, which was lovely. But obviously it gave us a bit of a challenge to sift through those. And what we've done is we've broken it down basically into 3 or 4 time chunks. So the first one we're going to chat about tonight is everything that was nominated before 1980, which was a couple of hundred songs originally, and I think we voted on about 60 or so, 65 songs from that list. So we'll have a look at that and get your feedback on it. We will also have a chat about what bands and artists are Scottish, and that in itself created enough debate to last a while. And obviously we will have a look at whether we can get a name for the podcast, because we don't have one yet. So how does all that sound? Is it something that is it something that interests you generally, the whole kind of great Scottish artists and some of the songs that have come out?
I think sorry, Caroline, on you go.
No, it's fine. Just very much so. I think it's a really interesting enterprise, and certainly this list is incredibly diverse.
Incredibly diverse and quite difficult to manage, I guess, on that basis, because everything's very subjective, isn't it? So, and we know that. Alistair, sorry, you're going to come in there.
I think what's interesting for me, particularly with this one that's pre-80s, is this will be the list I probably know less well. So it's been nice to go back, and there's a lot of tracks I do know from growing up in the 70s, but there's some that I really didn't know much at all. So it's been great to kind of discover them. And sometimes with bands that you maybe had a preconception about, and then you listen to that track that's on and you go, oh no, I didn't realise that. So it's been really enjoyable through doing that.
Good. And we've managed to get, the last time we did this, I was quite slow getting organised. I hadn't really did it before, to be honest. But this time we've managed to get like playlists and stuff put together and running. So one of the biggest issues we had the last time was there was people sort of voting blind on lots of records, and it was kind of skewing some of the votes that we had. Don't really know it, therefore I'll say it's not very good, which we didn't really like. So I think we're trying to get as many guys as possible to listen, and I've got to be fair to them. If you've been following any of it on the chat, there's lots of people saying, wow, didn't know that, need to go back and listen to that was new to me. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to vote for it, but at least there's more awareness now of some of it. And the other thing we did with the voting itself is that we have a don't know it option on the vote now, which has actually been quite important, because maybe slightly concerning that a lot of the songs have quite high don't knows. I think the shop assistants were on the other night with 40% somewhere in China. I know. But you know, if they don't know it, I guess I guess at least it's not necessarily people saying I don't like it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I've also had some people already say, wow, shop assistants, wow, they're great, you know. So
Mhm.
so you hope there is some sort of on benefit from
Mhm.
doing this as we go down. But
Mhm.
we'll see how that goes. The other thing just to mention to both of you, and just to get a view for you on it. So when the guys do vote, there's a broad rule that for any song to qualify for the sort of final stages, it has to get 50% or more of the vote. So it doesn't just have to be a yes vote by majority, it has to be yes, 50% or more. There was one the other night, which was Pale Blue Eyes, I think,
Mhm.
Edwyn Collins and
Mhm.
Falcon, yeah,
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
which got 48%. And I had a bit of a sort of a kicking from a couple of the guys saying, you know, you're going to have to put it through. And I says, well, I'm not, because it didn't get 50%, much as I love it.
Mhm.
So it's not to say we can't choose to put some songs in, but that's the current rule at the moment. I just think it has to be more than 50 for it to have credibility. Are you okay
Tonight
with that?
all nights, these things really matter, I think, considering what's going on elsewhere in the world. Such things really do matter.
Are you okay with that, Carleen? Does it stick with you that's a bit of a kind of hard rule?
I think, well, it probably is for some of the things that I would have on the list, to be honest, Brian, but I, believe in democracy. So, I mean, certainly, if I'm asked to put one forward tonight, it won't be one that got anywhere near 50%. But I've
That's
got
okay.
reasons for saying it, and I'll come to that when you get to that bit in the podcast.
Perfect. And that one of the things the podcast will do, and they did the last time, was we have the option to influence, much as we love the guys on Twitter X, as a podcast that adds value, hopefully. So part of our job's to inform as well. And I think when we did the 100 albums, I think we got a pretty balanced outcome to that. So it's a grown-up conversation, so I'm sure we'll be fine. Okay. Right. Okay. So let's start off with the actual what constitutes a Scottish band that could vote or take part in the conversation. That itself was probably hard enough. So if the technology works, I'll just pull up what we ended up looking at. Hopefully
Okay.
this will work. So tell me you can see that.
Yes.
Yep.
Magic. Okay. So, I mean, all the obvious ones were a bit of a given, although we were having a bit of a laugh about certain bands. I think you could probably write down 30 or 40 bands that are clearly Scottish by definition.
Yep.
And then we asked the guys on Twitter and some of our friends, who else might be out there that you might want to sort of challenge or I guess vindicate the fact that there is a kind of Scottish element to them. So we ended up voting on whatever that is, about 15 bands. And the ones on the left are the ones that came in. If I just give you an example and then I'll get some comments from you. So Big Country are on there, and we had such a laugh at Big Country because you can't think of anything more Scottish than Big Country. But of course, none of the band were born in Scotland.
Mm.
And even that in itself was quite an education for lots of people. Doesn't take away from how great they are and how the fact that their band sort of came from the development area and all the things we know about them. But we still asked the question, and even in that debate, there was people going, "Oh well, okay, well, if they're not, none of them are born here, then they're not Scottish, are they?" So, um, but we got a sort of fairly common sense approach to that. So the ones on the left are all ticks. So is there anything on that list that you're looking at thinking shouldn't really be on there?
No, but I can't believe 5% of the people that voted didn't think the Proclaimers were Scottish.
I've got a confession to make. I was born in Yorkshire. I was born in Bradford. And at the ripe old age of 18 months, I was brought back up by my Scottish parents to Scotland. So I think I'll pass on that rule. I'm really interested by Bronski Beat and Marillion, but for those, so what you've got is two very Scottish front people, pushing that into they are Scottish, which is fine, absolutely fine.
Yeah, that's interesting as well, Alistair. I think Bronski Beat, I would tend to go along with that one. And it's a kind of weird thing to say, but I think they feel Scottish. I think particularly Small Town Boy and stuff like that. I think there's a real kind of working class subculture, housing estate, tough life. Kind of feels quite. I know that could be an English thing as well, but it does feel quite sort of Glaswegian And
But
it's
the irony is the song's all about him leaving all of those things to go down and find himself in London. And but I know what you mean.
yeah, whereas Marillion, I would tend to agree with you. I mean, I think I might have said on the chat at the time, I don't really get that. I think nobody more Scottish than Fish, but I don't think Marillion as a band are particularly Scottish. Caroline?
I would agree with you there as well. And I suppose it depends which era of Marillion you're talking about, because been going without Fish for a lot longer than they ever were going with Fish.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it was a call it the classic lineup, the originals. We've actually only ended up with one song really on the list, Kaylee. And I'm not going to cause a riot by knocking it out, but I did think it was quite surprising that I think Fish solo, that'd be different, I guess, because obviously he's done solo work. But certainly Marillion almost fall into the Talking Heads category for me.
It's really interesting looking at this because I've seen Colin Hayes, the lead singer of Men at Work, do a solo gig, and you will not meet a more Ayrshire man than Colin Hay. I mean, he really has got the full thing. But of course, Men at Work aren't Scottish. It's easy to say that. But these little nuances are really interesting.
What's your take on AC/DC then?
I don't think they're Scottish.
Okay.
There's probably more statues in Scotland of AC/DC than there is of Millennial. But I kind of agree as well. I guess I do. I'm a big AC/DC fan, but Bon Scott in particular, even though where he was born, I mean, he fair dinkum, he was the total Aussie dude. And I think, yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that as well. It's interesting how close it is though to 50.
Very close. And I think there was I couldn't really get into all the chat because there's quite a lot of it, but I think pretty much there was a kind of sub-discussion that says that the Bon Scott AC/DC were arguably Scottish in their roots, very close to being a sort of Scottish faces, if you want, at the beginning. And then obviously they became much more of a kind of heavy rock, heavy metal, heavy American MR thing. But a lot of that was post Bon Scott, really. So I think that's kind of where the guys were coming from, that, three young guys go out to Australia and the kind of essence of what they were when they were in Scotland goes into their early music, albeit they're in Australia. But as you say, I think everyone then thought, well, when they became sort of, Back in Black time and whatever, it's very hard to argue there's a kind of Scottishness to what they do. And of course, we had the Talking Heads chat, which Caroline kept trying to re-persuade us that that we should be getting them back in there. And I think there is a David Byrne solo. I think Lazy or something might be nominated and something else down the line in the 90s. But I just couldn't get Talking Heads at all, much as I love them. Never Scottish in a million years. I also didn't know Dire Straits, both the Knopflers were born in Glasgow. I had no idea about that. No idea about it. I think somebody nominated them and I asked why. And they said, well, they're both from Glasgow. I didn't know that. Do you guys know that? I
did know that, yeah.
Right.
I think they maybe did a kind of what I'm going to call a reverse me, and they went down there quite young. I think that's right.
That's right. Went down the northeast, I think. And I'm not sure if they'd argue that the Dire Straits are Scottish, but Martin Knopfler, again, has, I think, Local Hero, got nominated. And again, that went in as a solo nomination. So I think we've been reasonably fair about not just we don't like them, inverted commas, Talking Heads being a great example. Yeah, and I think we ended up, what was Rod Stewart, we had a whole Rod chat, and it's interesting, we had quite a lot of guys, mainly from outside the kind of the Scottish chat, if you want, quite a lot of guys coming on from England and stuff saying, why is Rod not on the list? And I think he's just perceived to be Scottish, isn't he, really?
Well, I suppose unlike some of the other artists on that side of the list, I mean, he's not shy about banishing whatever Scottish credentials that he has. So, he's always seems to have identified very strongly with that. So I guess that's probably why they're making that assumption.
Yeah, I think so. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think he's ever lived in Scotland.
I don't think I've ever considered him Scottish. Rod got big, obviously I'm a big Faces fan, but really got big when I was growing up with the kind of Atlantic crossing period when it was just seemed so mid-Atlantic and all of that stuff. And then he had the disco period. I don't think, yes, he's really embraced his roots in the last 20 years, but I think sometimes in the way that American politicians embrace their Irishness, there's a little bit of that.
Yeah, well said, mate. Well said. Well, that is the list. I think obviously the guys on the left-hand side now have all had songs nominated. The likes of Garbage we haven't got to yet, but we will. And the rest are obviously in the votes now. So Loiconic Emotions were on the list. Loico Solo isn't
Mhm.
on the list. And Lloyd himself come on and said that was quite right, which I quite liked.
More endorsement do you need?
Touche. So yeah, so it was really good. And the only other PS to that was I got a bit of a hard time from Robert Howard, from the Blow Monkeys. Wanted to know why he wasn't on it because he was born in Haddington, I think.
And I didn't know that until very recently. So that's a good example of what you're saying, Brian. I didn't
Absolutely.
know that until maybe about 10 years ago.
I didn't know
I
that until there started being an argument on Twitter about it.
well, I did know that, but I'll tell you why I knew because I had him on as a guest on the Live Music and Me podcast maybe 6 months ago. So obviously I did a little bit of sort of research and stuff, but I had no idea until I read up on it. So, but I had to politely tell him that he wasn't Scottish, which, which didn't get down too well. But so that was the starting point. So it gave us a nice jumping off debate with a bit of fun, of course, to then get into talking about the music. And as I say, what we then done was we thought, okay, let's try and grab up all the songs that predate sort of 1980, and we'll try and get a bit of a list of voting going on that. And you talked about eclectic earlier, Alistair, and with so much fun putting together a voting list that would reflect everything from the 1930s to 1979. You couldn't get a broader church really. So we'll pull up what we ended up with. So I hope you can see that okay. It's a
Yeah,
little bit fuzzy, but it should be okay, I think.
I think so.
So the ones on the left-hand side were all the kind of slam dunks. So um, everything from Jerry Rafferty, Baker Street, down the way to Magic by Pilot, which was 50%. So we've gave them the benefit of the doubt, the 50s, to put them in. So at the moment, the Twitter votes put all of those guys through to the kind of latter stages when we'll do some more voting, when we put all the kind of different decades together. So any surprises in there?
I suppose the thing that struck me, Brian, was that there are 3 artists in there, each with 2 songs.
Yeah, that's what I thought, Caroline. That was interesting.
And,
Yeah.
It's going to be really difficult getting this down to 100 anyway, but if you end up with lots of duplicates, it's probably not going to achieve as much diversity in the list as you would have hoped for.
Really good point. And I think one of the things I guess I want us all to consider, rightly or wrongly, when I've asked the guys for nominations, I didn't want to be too prescriptive then about saying, well, we're not going to take that one, when in effect it's the song that you're really voting on rather than the band. But of course, if you look at the 80s one at the moment, that Orange Juice, Aztec Camera, Mary Chain, Simple Minds, I think they've all got maybe 4 or 5 nominations each. So I think on the basis that quite a lot of those will probably get more than 50%, I think the podcast team then has another conversation to have to say how many of those will we allow to go into a sort of final list, because I certainly don't want a list of Orange Juice songs there, much as I love them. Doesn't really reflect Scottish music, I don't think. So yeah, so I think there is a couple of doublers there. I'm sure the songs themselves probably do merit being on the list. I think a few guys asked me about the skids in the 80s, and I said, well, we don't have any on the 80s list, but we did put 2 in from 79. And again, there are songs you could argue all day long with the skids, but you could do that with any band.
Yeah.
So I think that's enough, I think, for them. I think it's 2 of the best songs they ever wrote, so.
But you didn't consider having just, when we get down to it, just having one song from one band?
I didn't at the beginning. If I've been honest with you, I didn't really know how many nominations we're going to get. So I think if I'd known I was getting 5,000, I might have put some more rules around it. I suppose it's within our gift to be able to say, look, there's 5 Orange Juice songs nominated, but we'll take the ones with the 2 highest votes or something like that. I think there's plenty of ways we can trim it down as we're going along, if we want to. But as I say, that list, what is that? I think there's about 17 or something on that. And there was a couple of worries on it. So I remember Gallic and Lyle had another song, that'd be Breakaway, I think would it have been. And that didn't, that must be on the other side somewhere. Which I was a bit surprised at. And what was the other one that didn't get voted on? Marmalade, Reflections of My Life, which is on the sort of yellow side, which we'll come on to. So there are songs that I thought, were kind of iconic Scottish songs and they would get voted through, but they didn't. So I've certainly got a view about, maybe a song that I'd like to put back on the list again. What about yourselves? Is there anything that's not green, anything on the other side that doesn't sit well with you and you want to consider moving?
I've got a couple of things, but just before we get to that, again, I'm trying to get my head around. So the doublers, we've got 2 Skids, 2 Saab, 2 Sensational Alex Harvey Band, 2 Bay City Rollers, and 2 John Martin. So they're splitting the votes of the. I know we're not voting on the individual artists, but they've got to, haven't they? Kind of, you would imagine, if we did this again and see you got to pick one.
That's a brilliant point, Ali. Do you know, I think maybe George or somebody said maybe what you should do. I think there was 6 Simple Minds songs that. I mean, there was 25 Simple Minds songs nominated by the guys on Twitter, but when we looked at the ones that were sort of regular nominations, I think there was about half a dozen that were getting like multiple nominations. But I think the chart was, well, put the 6 of them on a vote, and the top 2 or whatever of the Simple Minds vote, if you want, goes into a sort of a bigger list or a final list. So it's certainly something we could revisit once we're at that point.
I mean, I think that would be quite a good way of doing it, Ryan, because at least if anybody challenges it, you can show your workings. You've asked people, and that's what your public have decided.
Yeah, I think so. If you agree, I say I mean, Carling, you know this, we literally made it up as we went along last time, so there's no particular rules to how we do it, as long as we're happy that it's a reasonable kind of outcome that we get to. I'm just having a quick look. George sent me some comments, so if you could just bear with me a second. He said, or he said about Baker Street. Stone Cold Classic. Seemingly the Bull Jerry got a 6-figure royalty from this every year, allowing him to see out his years drinking himself to death in real style. Pity Bob Holness wasn't involved. Exclamation mark. So that was that. Bay City Rollers, Shangalang. He said, brings back memories of the crew and the cross running against the Priesty and the Bundy. They may have sang Shangalang as they carved each other's faces, but I cannot recall. Top quality pop though. And there was one other one that he mentioned. Yeah, I'll just mention Marmalade because I shouted out there. He says about Reflections, I stormed into Marmalade's dressing room in Zurich after a 60s revival gig. They weren't at all impressed. All I wanted to say to them was what the Reflections was one of the great songs of the era, but I was too pissed to be remotely coherent. The sentiment still stands. So George has given us quite a few comments on them, but all broadly positive. And I think he's sort of validating most of that left-hand side with a few caveats on the right-hand side. So what are we surprised then that's not sitting green on the right-hand side?
Well,
or wish it was that better.
Yeah, well, the Rosillos are sitting sort of pretty much at the top of the yellow list, and if I was in charge of this, I would swap out Top of the Pops for I Can't Stand My Baby, because any song that uses the word Raj in it has got to be one of the best Scottish songs of all time.
That's magic.
I would happily see that kind of swap as well. I think it's a better song. I think Top of the Pops is clearly the better known song, which is probably why it's been voted for. But yeah, I think that I Can't Stand My Baby is a classic.
So there's a question. You think if I asked Faye Five, what I should say put both on, of course, but which one do you think she would call?
Oh, I wouldn't like to speak for Faye.
No, I don't think any of us would.
No, I've had that pleasure. Okay, that's really interesting. I mean, it only just missed. I'm not sure I want to put 2 on,
Sure.
because it goes back to our debate again, doesn't it? Okay, well we'll cogitate on that one a little bit. I think George's other comment was around the Lulu cover of Man Who Sold the World.
Oh, that's interesting. I would go for Lulu, but I would go to Sir With Love. I just love it as a song. I just think it's a classic song, and it's not a cover. Well, it's not a cover, so yeah.
It's not a cover, no.
Yeah, and I think I just think it's one I would put into that top section.
Yeah, I mean, it was a number one in America, I think, To Serve
Mhm.
Love.
Yeah.
Huge. Because of the Bond thing, whatever. But it sort of missed its way really in the UK. Didn't really have the same impact. Whereas
Well,
Man Who
Sidney
Sold the World,
Poitier film, wasn't it, that she was in? It's
Yes.
the sequel to the Sidney Poitier film that
Yeah.
she was, which I don't think was as big here as it maybe was in the States.
yeah. Caroline, I know it's people doing Bowie's probably not your sweet spot, but you know what's your view on Lulu and the two songs that are there?
Um, hmm.
Bowie loved it
I don't
apparently.
have strong views. I like both of them.
Yeah, apparently
But
Bowie
it,
loved the
it,
cover.
but it would seem to me that if Lulu's going to be on there with a song somewhere, it would probably have to be Shout.
I know it was nominated.
Is it? Well, I mean, it is a Marmite song. I find it a bit much. Maybe because I've heard it so often, so many things over the years. But when I hear that initial thing, I think my instinct these days is to
Fair enough.
Maybe there's a mini Lulu vote we could do. To Serve with Love, Shout, and Man Who Sold the World. And
It is very interesting that Shout isn't on there.
no, it genuinely was nominated. Because I had a wee look at it again. Okay, I will take that away. I also thought the Rock Island Line song might have got a nomination, but and get through. But again, it's maybe just
Well, that was my other one, Brian, was Lonnie Donegan, just because I think this is a guy who is a real rock and roll inspiration, you know, a real game changer for a lot of what came next. And I think it wasn't just skiffle, it was harder than skiffle, it was more edgy. So I think you can see that move from skiffle to kind of rock and roll with Lonnie Donegan almost, you know, kind of handing the baton over to what came next.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I'm a big
Totally.
fan of him.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to ask you then. So, is there anything from the yellow list that on the podcast tonight you would like us to put back on the green list? Because you have a veto, you can put one selection from yellow to green. Caroline.
Well, I would put Adultery by the Scars. Well, actually, probably I would go Horror Show by Scars. Not only because it was one of my nominations in the first place,
It was.
but I think it set a tone for a lot of what followed in terms of Scottish post-punk. I think it was also on Fast, as you know, incredibly influential Scottish label, not just for Scottish acts, but for bands like the Gang of Four and the Mekons. And I mean, I think Horror Show has been called Scotland's answer to anarchy, and I wouldn't particularly fall out with that, so that would be mine. But I suspect it's not anybody else's, but it would be mine.
I've got it written down here. I've got the Scars written down here for those very reasons, because I think while this is a really good list, the kind of punk and post-punk era, Rosillo's aside, isn't really represented, but that was a real kind of change that was going on as we move into the 80s. That was a hugely influential. And I think the Scars, even though maybe people, not as many people know them as should, were that influential band to so many others. So I think the Scars is a great shout.
Okay. And it's interesting. I'm more than happy to put it on for all the reasons you've just said, Caroline, but there's definitely something in the I don't know, the perspective that the guys have, where if it's anything that's even remotely postcard, it just garners love of all sorts, whether it is postcard or, you know, connected to postcard. I don't know, the Bluebells and Aztec Cameron, things like that. Whereas the fast product stuff is revered, but it seems to be revered in a different way. It's sort of deeper, if you want, rather than broader. I don't know if that's the right way of
I mean, I
explaining it,
think
maybe.
that's a lot to do with how that particular era has been written about. And I mean, I think there have been recent things published which have kind of broadened out, you know, Johnny Johnson's Joseph K book, for example, would be that. But even so, despite the fact that there is quite a lot of writing about Scottish post-punk music at the moment, I mean, for me, it'll leave, you know, there are still a lot of key bands that really don't get their dues. The Visitors would be one. You know, and there are a number of others from that era who I think their influence is perhaps not as acknowledged as it should be. Whereas the whole, you know, rightly so, the whole myth almost that's grown up around postcard puts it kind of ahead of a lot of other things that were going on at the time, and not necessarily rightly.
I'm totally fine with that. And I think the other thing I really like about that is it allows us to recreate the debate again. Because obviously, if we put them back on, they'll be in polls as we go down the line, and it allows us to talk again about Fast Product and refer some of those other bands that have been in there on Twitter X and no doubt in future podcasts. So that works really well. Let's put that one right to left. I
Just
was
to follow up, sorry, Brian, just to
okay.
follow up, I think a lot of it was to do with the radio play at the time as well. And most of the radio stations, Clyde or Scotland, were based mainly in the West Coast. And the postcard stuff was getting played all the time on these radio stations, where maybe, I mean, I had a few Scars songs back in the day, you know, Joseph K, but usually only when it was a cover. You didn't get to hear the kind of breadth of stuff that you did with Orange Juice, for instance.
Yeah, and Touche as well, Alistair. My upbringing was very similar, probably because I was from the West Coast, I guess. And it was only sort of latterly that, you know, in real time, I didn't really get all that stuff. I was only, maybe only 13 or 14 as well, so on the edge of being too young for it, but certainly if I had been as aware of it as I was with Postcard, I'd have been right into it at the time, you know, so.
Well, I mean, I suppose that's geography speaking, really, because I, you know, grew up on the East Coast and I've been living in Edinburgh for years, so my perspective will be informed by that.
Which is good. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's whack it on. Is there any more on that list? Not that we can move them all over, but because you both in effect said Horror Show by the Scars, which is great. And I was going to suggest Reflections of My Life by Marmalade, and I guess there's a couple of reasons for that. One was when I was young, I had no idea they were Scottish. I think I heard Obi Di Da, and because it was the Beatles, I obviously Eminem could sing that, and I loved that. And then Reflections, and I heard it when I was maybe 9 or 10, and thought it was amazing. And it was only as I maybe get into my later teenage years that I found out Marmalade was Scottish. And I think the reason that that's important to me is that I mean that as a compliment. I think the song was so good. It could have literally been, it could have been West Coast America, it could have been anywhere, any band making it. It just seemed to be an iconic song. And then when I found out these guys were all from the kind of Lanarkshire area, I was gobsmacked by it. And I also think it stood the test of time very well, and it was a number one in America, I think. So again, not many bands have done that. They were also the first band to have a UK number one single for Scottish band ever. With Obladi.
Yeah,
but again, just
I have to say that cover version. I hadn't heard the track Rad Dancer, which is on the yellow list.
Yeah,
I thought that was just fantastic, and I wouldn't have listened to that if it hadn't been on this list, because I had my idea of who Marmalade were, and it kind of tipped that over.
Yeah, and I've probably had my ear bent by Bobby Bluebell quite a lot. Bobby's a huge fan of Marmalade and some of that, and yes, and Rad Dancer again was one that he recommended that I listened to. So I think for the reasons you mentioned, the Scars, I think the Marmalade and themselves were probably quite important. And then I think some of the singer-songwriters that came through the 70s, because they were a pretty influential band, late 60s into 70s. They were down in London at the time with Hendrix and all that kind of stuff. So so I think that, you know, they had their chops as well as being successful. I'm not sure where they'll go with future votes, but I do think they probably merit going back across, and it just gives us a little bit more context as well to that late 60s, early 70s stuff, because there's not really much of it on the list at the moment. So are we okay with that?
Sounds like we have consensus.
Perfect.
Just reminded me, Brian, so what have we moved back over?
We've moved over Horror Show by the Scars, and we have moved over Reflections of My Life by Marmalade.
Okay.
And we've left, at the moment, all the ones on the left-hand side in, albeit the doublers and the other stuff, Ali's, is for another day, mate. Okay.
I just wonder, you know, I could see the final thing if you're putting doublers or treblers in. I just wonder if you have one song per band and it'll make for but maybe this is for off air, maybe this is for finally. But you know what I mean? It's an interesting thing to do, because I could imagine when we get to the 80s, and I've looked at the list, if you get a block vote of, we know Orange Juice fans can be like, you could be having orange juice for days.
Followed by Belle and Sebastian, I would hazard, I guess.
Yeah, and Simple Minds are the big one for me. I know we'll come on to that in the 80s podcast, but I was genuinely taken aback by the amount of love and support. And of course, if you look back, early Simple Minds were were iconic, weren't they? You know,
The
so
Simple Minds track on here, isn't there?
Yeah,
Chelsea
Girl.
Girl, that missed out, yeah. But listen, there's plenty more Simple Minds coming, so don't worry about them too much. Okay. Okay, Magic, and your points noted, Ali. I don't know what we'll do with the doublers and triplers, but we'll
And I
certainly do something.
And I mean, I kind of tend to agree with his point because, you know, you potentially could end up with, you know, the next list because you've got several acts that have got multiple nominations on the green list as it is, and these perhaps are not the most popular polling artists, whereas, you know, as we've already said, Orange Juice could be moving for poll domination.
World domination, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah. Let's see how we work that one out on the next one. We've got a few more voting parties to go in the 80s. We've got another one tomorrow night, so we're sort of working through those just now. Okay, cool. That was Magic. Thanks for that. Managed to get a bit of context to that. So I guess the other thing that's kind of been live. So we had are the bands Scottish enough? Are the artists Scottish enough? What do we think of the pre-80s stuff, which we've just done? Thank you. And then the third one was we're hoping to get a name for the podcast. We asked the guys for some suggestions. Some of these came from Twitter X. Some of them came from the likes of George Patterson, John Welsh, Lisa. So we've had them from a sort of fairly broad church. So I've got a little slide here with, I think, the kind of better ones, if you want, are the more interesting ones. I mean, some of these are these are genius, right? And they're in no order whatsoever, just as I pulled them all out. But they've all got some sort of connection to either a song or something that's, you know, in its de facto Scottish. So I'll let you have a wee look at them. A couple that I particularly enjoyed as they came in were Never Met a Squirrel Like You Before, which I thought was just genius. Bay City Polars, which I think was Lisa. One Night in Bangkok.
That would be John.
That was John. It wasn't John, actually. John supported it. I think it was someone else that nominated it. But again, I think I knew Banknote was in Scotland, but can't remember last time anyone ever said it, you know. So yeah, but they're all really good. So is there any on there that, other than laughing at them, but we'll go, if we end up asking the guys to vote on them, one of these will be called the podcast for the next 5 or 6 months. So we have to be careful what we wish for here.
This is a purely practical consideration, Brian, but some of them have got quite a lot of characters in them.
They do, absolutely.
So I don't know whether that is a factor in terms of the space that would take up in your tweets.
That's a really good point. See, I wouldn't think of stuff like that. That's just way above me. I would just bemoan the fact I've only got 240 characters and that's taken up 100 of them. So yeah, listen, that's a good point, actually. I've thought of that. Okay, I'll take that on board. What would your sort of couple of favourites be if there's ones that we want to try and do a wee short list of?
I've never met a squirrel like you before jumped out at me just because it's I love a pun. But it might be one of these ones that's too long. I think it'd be good to have one that was unique to you. So something like iTunes is quite generic. It's been done before. Pure Dead Brilliant. If people are, again, practicalities, if people are Googling and searching for it, they might kind of not get there first. Where I really like List Go Round Again as well. But yeah.
Okay. Carling?
I like Never Met a Squirrel Like You Before either. It's the one that jumped out to me too. But as I say, it might be a wee bit long. I quite like Bay City Polars because it does what it says in the tin.
It does indeed. It's got a few less characters. And I like the sound of Old Scotland, but again, albeit it's quite long again. I don't know, maybe we don't change it every episode because we don't get any brand identity then, do we? So
if you want something that kind of grabs attention, I think Never Met a Squirrel Like You Before really would grab attention.
Okay.
That's my feeling.
Okay. Fine. I don't know what to do about that then.
Well, you said you were going to think about picking out 3 or 4 and putting them up for a vote.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the plan. So I put Skittle up was one. What else do we like up there?
Caroline mentioned Polars, which I think is a good one as well.
Basically Polars.
And List Go Round Again, I think is good.
List. Okay. I'll take, there's 3 there, and I'll take one more off the rest of them. And
Aye.
it gives us 4, and then I'll ask the guys what they think. Yeah, I'll tell you what will happen. We'll vote on it, and we'll get a lot more suggestions.
Oh, good.
Because that's what happens. The thing that kind of grows arms and legs again when we start doing it again. So,
The whole of
but
the tunes is quite good as well. Suddenly,
isn't it? Isn't it?
That's
It's
the
really
one.
good. I just sat and laughed at them, to be honest.
they're
Even
very good.
Old Age Fan Club. I think that was. I think that's George's. So it's
Mhm.
again, it's very apt. I think for the kind of us in the audience that we're talking to. Okay, so I'll do. You maybe see a wee poll popping up if you're on the Twitter page over the next few days, and we'll try and get a decision for that so we can start calling it something. And your point's a valid one. When I'm doing it at the moment, Caroline, that the 30 greatest Scottish song things it is chunking into a lot of the text that we use. So I probably need something a bit quicker. So. Okay, cool. Let me just come out of that then, because that's more than enough slides for one night. Magic. So we've done the backstory, done the pre-80s stuff, had a go at shortlisting for a name. So hopefully by the next time we podcast will be called something, which isn't too rude. So the plan from here is that we're doing the 80s voting at the moment. So I think we've did 4 voting parties. There's another one tomorrow night. And it is the kind of apex of voting interest, if I can call it that. We've had more nominations for the 80s than any other decade, which I guess is understandable. So this one's quite chunky, and I think once we get past that, 90s and the noughties and stuff's great. There's some amazing stuff on there, but it definitely does start to tail a little bit as you go down. So hopefully it'll get a bit easier. So the plan is to do these roughly as we get to the end of each of the time blocks. So I'm guessing that's every month or so. So the next time, hopefully, we'll review the 80s lists, and then we'll, join that to the pre-80s stuff, and then we'll try and build off the back of that if we can. Okay. Is there any other kind of questions or observations that you wanted to give on it? Because one of my questions for you to finish was, is there a song that you would sort of die on the hill for? Is there a song that if this song isn't on the top 10 at the end, I'm going to go and find Elon Musk and put a Tesla up his backside or whatever? What's your take on that?
I wouldn't say that I have a song, but I do have a number of bands who will be very disappointed if they don't make an appearance.
I was going to say very similar. I was going to say, I'm okay with this 70s one. If the Blue Nile don't appear in the next one, then, pitchforks down the street.
Yeah, I'd get my pitchfork out for the fire engines.
Fire engines, well, I think they've just crashed and burned already, haven't they? On
I
one
know.
of the...
That was one of my nominations are not doing well, Brian.
No, that's always the way with ours, Caroline, to be honest. But I think it's quite an important point, because I think when the Blue Nile, I think we just started on them for the 80s, and Let's Go Out Tonight, I think was one of them, and it might have scraped in, I think. I think
I understand that. Yeah.
George was on saying, I mean, George can be quite rich with his language, but I mean, he was right. He's just saying, like, I mean, where have you been all your life? Now, you don't have to be a Blue Nile lover. I'm not saying every Blue Nile song's the best ever, but there are certain songs that some amazing bands do that are just really beyond reproach, and then you sort of half the guys go, oh, it's okay type thing, and you think, wow. But isn't that the point that,
I think that maybe feeds into, again, I hate to bang on about this, but having one, because a Blue Nile fans will probably split over about 5 songs, if not more, as will other bands as well. If you have to, and it maybe will be votes nearer the time saying, you know what, we've got 6 Simple Minds songs. We're going to have to pick our best one. And it might make for a more interesting list at the end of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'd much rather have a list that had the fire engines on it, even if they're number 100, than 10 Orange Juice songs.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Carly. I genuinely would. And if we double back to where we got to with the 100 album stuff, if we had the chance to do it again, we would have put a filter on, because I think there was 5 Beatles, wasn't it, on the top 20 maybe? No, love the Beatles, right? But do we really need to tell people how great the Beatles are? I think we needed to, and we did a little bit, because we did manage to stretch it out when we got our own stuff on top of that, but it was a lesson learned. So we'll make sure we don't do that again.
And there's a balance to be struck, I guess, because you want to be reflecting what people are voting in the polls. You don't want to ask them to vote and then ignore it, but
Yeah.
Totally, and also you don't want to not put songs on that genuinely are iconic, and a large proportion of the voting public have said they're iconic. That defeats the point really of doing it in the first place. So I just don't know where the balance sits at the moment. So both myself and George felt that Whatever's Written in Your Heart is a better song than Baker Street, inverted commas. And put it to the vote, and the guys went, well, yeah, it's great, but Baker Street's a lot better, stroke more iconic. It's just the way it is, isn't it? You can't have them all, so okay, well, we'll go away and peruse that and reflect on it over the next few weeks. So thanks again for coming on tonight. Hopefully not too painful the first one. Always takes a bit of time to kind of crank it up, but can't thank you enough for
very
your
well,
input.
Brian. I had envisioned this going on for hours when I looked. How's he going to get this into 40 minutes? But you managed to just.
They'll have called the American election before we're finished.
Oh, don't wait till we get further down the line. We try and get those 6 Simple Minds songs down into one. We'll be getting the sleeping bags out, I think. So, but no, that's good. So really nice start. We'll obviously get it onto to the YouTube page when it's ready, and we'll get it on Spotify, and we'll give you guys a shout when it's good to go. Okay.
Brilliant.
Magic. Thanks again for your
Thanks very
time.
much.
See you,
Till the next
Carol.
time.
Cheers.
Stay
Bye.
safe. See you later. Take care. Bye.
Bye.